Hello, I'm Helen Bradley and welcome to this video tutorial. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can fix a badly lit photo in Lightroom. Before we get started with this video tutorial, let's have a look at the image that we're going to be working on. And this image is just appalling. The light in this image is just shocking. It was shot in the Tokyo fish market, and the fish market actually takes place really early in the morning. So this was before dawn. There's no natural light to speak of, and everything that is lit in this image is lit by artificial light. And the camera really just didn't have a fighting chance of getting anything usable out of this scene. But this is what we can do in Lightroom, and what I've done is to relight the scene. I've moved the light where it's particularly good around here in the front of the image, and I'm going to send it to the back, and I'm going to light this area of the image and then deal with the problems that we have in the front area of the image. So let's just wind this back. I'm just going to go to my history, and I just want to create another virtual copy. So I'm going to go back to the original, create another virtual copy, and we'll just go back to this one, and I just want to send it back to its state. So we have, this is the target that we're sort of looking at creating, and this is our starting point. So there are a few things to be concerned about here. One, of course, is that I want to light the middle of this image. There's also some really interesting color casts happening here. You'll see that this color cast up here is very green, and the one down here is very pink. So we've got cool up here, warm down here. We don't want to see these boxes really very much at all, but we do want to see the middle of the image. The starting point for me is going to be, well, firstly, I need to bring this forward into the updated process version. So this has been processed with an older version of Lightroom. It was actually brought into an older version of Lightroom. So I'm just going to alt-click on this to bring it up to process version 2012. You should always do that if you're just working on a new image, if you've had it open in a previous version of Lightroom. Let's go to the basic panel here. I'm going to start with a white balance. I'm going to white balance to something sort of in the area that I'm interested in. Well, I'm looking for something a little bit warmer than this, and I'm not getting it right now. So I think I'm just going to warm the image up manually. I'm just going to drag on the temperature slider to warm the middle of the image up just a little bit. Maybe that's a bit too warm. But I'm ignoring everything that is subject to the color cast and only really looking at the area of the image that I'm interested in relighting. Let's have a look now at exposure, because the exposure is all in the dark area. So I'm just going to wind up the exposure, and while we're there, let's just turn on highlight clipping so that we can see the areas in which we have clipped highlights. But again, I'm looking at exposing for the middle of the image here. And the contrast is pretty flat because of that, so I'm going to bring the contrast up a little bit too, to try and intensify again the lights and the darks in the middle of the image. Now I'm going to deal with the blown out highlights here by just dragging the highlight slider back down again, and you can see that because I was shooting in RAW, I now have no overexposed highlights. There's plenty of room in this image to work, and that's obviously one of the big benefits of working in RAW, is that we can even bring back clipped highlights in these lights here. Now shadows, again, I'm focusing on the middle of the image here. There's not a lot of shadow detail there, and so I don't actually think I'm going to do much with shadows at all. I'm just going to leave that where it started for now. Whites, I do want to plug my white point, so I'm going to hold Alt or Option as I drag on my white slider, because I do want 1 or 2 white pixels in this image, or I want to get just close to white. So I'm waiting until I get some white pixels appear, and I'm just backing the white slider off a little bit. So we've got a little bit of extra lightness in the image by taking the whites up to +7 to actually get close to those whites. But again, we don't have a blown out pixel in this image. Blacks, I'm going to alt drag on the black slider. Well, we do have some plug shadows. This sign up here is black, but you know, it's black paint on a white sort of or grey surface, so I'm not worried about that. In fact, I might actually drop my blacks down a little bit further. So now I've got good black and white points in the image, and the only really plugged shadows are up in this area here, which is an area not of concern to me at all. Now when adjusting clarity, I'm adding some mid-tone contrast to the image, so that's really helping this image, but at the same time alarm bells should go off in your head anytime you adjust clarity if you've got the risk of some highlight clipping, because clarity will generally bring back in some highlight clipping, and that's exactly what's happened here. So I'm just going to drag the highlights down a little bit. In fact, can't get them any further down, so let's just adjust the white point to bring that detail back, because the additional clarity will give me some unwanted highlight clipping. Now so far so good. We've lit the middle of the image, but we've still got a lot going on in the front of the image and stuff that we don't really want to be going on. So what I'm going to do now is to use the radial filter in Lightroom 5. Now if you don't have Lightroom 5, you could get a similar effect by using the adjustment brush. With the radial filter, I'm going to drag out the radial filter to a long oval. I'm going to rotate it just a little bit here, because what I want it to do is to affect the outside here. So if you were doing this with an adjustment brush, you'd be painting around the outside edges of the image. With the radial filter in its natural state, then what I'm doing is affecting the outside of the image, and I want a fair feather on this because I want this to be a subtle change from what's happening in the middle of the radial filter to what's happening out here. And what I want is darkening, so I'm going to drop the exposure down outside of this, and I'm going to drop the shadows down and again send them darker. So whatever I can do to darken the edges of this image, and I can even bring my highlights down too. So that's drawing attention now and relighting the middle part of the image, which is exactly what I want to do. Now while I'm here, I'm also going to drop clarity down, because that's going to make this a little less sharp, so our eyes are a little less likely to be drawn to what's happening here in the foreground, and I'll click done. Now I'm not really finished with the foreground because I've got a couple of things happening here. One is that this is really warm over here. You can really see the pink tones. There's probably a tungsten light right above these boxes here. So I'm going to grab the adjustment brush, and I'm going to make sure the auto mask is not turned on. And I do want a fairly high flow on this, probably about 80. So I'm going to click to pin down this brush. I'm going to press the letter O so that we can see the overlay, so we can see where we're painting. I'm just going to paint generally over these boxes where I'm seeing this color cast. Now I'm going to decrease my flow and increase my feather, and just move this out a bit so that I get this gradual gradation between where I'm drawing some color out of the image. I don't want my mask to be on at one pixel and off at the next. I want it to sort of go out gradually. So once I've done that, I'm going to turn my mask off by pressing the letter O. And here, because this is very warm, I want to cool it down. So I'm going to drag the temperature slider into the blue area. I'm probably going to need to do this a couple of times, once for these boxes here, and then add another adjustment brush for these boxes that are even worse. So again, click on the adjustment brush, click here, and now this adjustment is going to be only in these front boxes. It's going to increase up my flow. I think it's a bit too light here. Turn on my mask so I can see what I'm doing. Turn off my mask, again using the letter O for this, and again cooling this down. Maybe dropping a bit of green into this to kill the magenta too. Okay, when I'm happy with that, I'll just click done. Now I still want to kill some of the lightness in this area, and I could do this one of two ways. I could use the adjustment brush, but let's have a go at the graduated filter. Graduated filter, when I click on it, I'm just going to turn everything off back to its normal value, which you can do by just double clicking any of these that are turned on, or hold the Alt key and click the reset option will also bring all of these sliders back to their neutral position. Now the graduated filter has to be attached to one side of the image, so I'm just going to click here and drag upwards, and that attaches it to the bottom edge of the image. In this area here, any changes that I make are going to be applied at full force, and then they're gradually going to peter out so that here they're not affecting the image at all. And what I want to do is to darken this area of the image, so I'm just going to drop down the exposure quite a bit. May also want to drop down the contrast so that there is less distinction between darks and light. In fact, that's not really helping me at all, so I'm going to reset that. I'll bring down highlights because that is part of my problem here, and I'm going to darken my shadows. And again, I can decrease clarity because that will help me by making these areas softer. So too will decreasing saturation. That will take some of the color out of these areas of the image, and it's actually finishing off that color cast. Let's just set saturation back to 0. You'll see I've still got a little bit of legacy pink in here, but look what happens when I decrease the saturation. Well, I'm getting a better match between these boxes, and again, my eye is going less to this area of the image because it's not nearly as obvious as it was. We'll try a little bit more of reduced exposure at this point, and then click done. Before I leave this image, there are other little bits that I may want to draw attention to. For example, there's a person here with a box in his hand, and we may want to light him a little bit better. And again, we would do that with the adjustment brush. Just click on the adjustment brush, click on the person so we can see the pin in place. I'm going to press O so that my mask is visible and just paint over this person, but being careful not to pick up this light here because the light is already pretty intense, so I don't want to make that show up more, but I do want to make the person show up more. To adjust the brush on the fly, I'm just using the square bracket key. That's exactly the same key as you can use in Photoshop to change your brush size, and just makes it useful because I don't have to keep going back to the panel over here to change my brush size. If I'm happy with the mask, I'll press the letter O to turn the mask overlay off. And now let's add just a little bit extra exposure and perhaps a little bit extra contrast into this area. Let's zoom out so that we can see the effect in place. So there is the slightly better lit person over there, and again drawing our attention into this area of the image where there is more action and more of interest than there is in the front or the top of the image. Now let's see how far we've come with this image. This is the before, and you can see that we had clipped highlights and the light in the image was all wrong. The front of the image was well lit and the middle action part of the image has no light there at all. But the whole thing is easily salvageable in Lightroom. All we've done is to relight the image. We've brought out detail in the middle of the image where the action in the fish market is, and we've decreased the light in the areas that we're less interested in. So we've been able to relight the image and get a more usable image from this as a result. I'm Helen Bradley. Thank you for joining me for this video tutorial. Look out for more of my video tutorials here on this YouTube channel, and consider subscribing to my channel and you'll be alerted when new videos are released. And visit my website at projectwoman.com where you'll find more tips, tricks and tutorials on a range of applications including Photoshop, Lightroom, Illustrator and a whole lot more.